This has been a crazy week. I was up um in San Francisco for Shabbat, and that was great. Maybe I saw some of you there. And then I was in Seattle for the first half of the week, doing some teaching up there. And I'm in Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles between those two. I'm in Los Angeles again, and I'm heading to Denver tomorrow, um, to do some teaching. We are partnering on a Yom Iyun there in Denver on Sunday, with Valley Beit Midrash and Jewish Colorado. Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz and Dr. Julie Lieber and I will be teaching. So if you are in the Denver area or you know anyone in the Denver area, um, let them know about this opportunity. Let's see if I can find a link to it. I'm totally like scattered and disorganized today, but I think I can get a link for you. But yeah, I'd love to see. I'm based in Los Angeles, but I'm the only Hadar representative out here on the West Coast. So I'm like trying my best to kind of represent the whole West Coast, and that's impossible. But I will be in Denver this Sunday. Um, yeah, Jess, I don't know if you can find the link to that event on Sunday, but I think I can't right now. Okay, so I also want to say, as I sort of scramble through this week, that this is also this is kind of the end of the year, or the end of the school year, and the end of the year before summer. And we always this class, which has been running for 3 years now, or more, four maybe at this point. This class always breaks during the summer. And usually we use Shavuot as a sort of a marker point, and then we meet up again after the summer, usually in the beginning of September, unless Rosh Hashanah is right then and then afterwards. There is one more week before Shavuot, and we could meet next week, but this week we are finishing the book of Leviticus, and it just seems like the right place to put a pause on our learning for the summer. Lots of folks go away during the summer. I go away during the summer, so we don't. It isn't as full a gathering, and I need a break. So this is the last class in this series, and we'll start up again next fall, or this coming fall, and I've been really grateful to have you. This has been such a through line in my life over the last few years. I mean, this class started in COVID and was like not a through line, but a lifeline, really. And then I moved, not immediately, but sort of transitioned out of my role at IKAR, and then eventually began this new role at Hadar. And this class is really like the through line between them. I was able to continue doing this class for IKAR, and also to welcome folks who are in the Hadar community, and so it's great to have this real anchor in my life, and I couldn't do it without all of you. So I'm grateful for your presence here. Okay, so with that said, let's say a blessing and get into this last class, and we're going to look today at we are in the last Parsha in the book of Leviticus, and so that's Parshat Behukotai, and it is a very difficult Parsha. It is a very yeah, it's not an easy Parsha, but we're gonna try and tackle at least some of it today. So let's begin. We'll begin with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank God for allowing us to study the Torah, to be amelim b'Torah. That's another phrase. La'asok b'Torah, like to to labor in the Torah. Another language for laboring in the Torah is amelim, and that language, I mention it because it's going to come up very soon in one of the commentaries we're going to look at. Okay, why is this such a difficult parsha, Behukotai? Because it contains the infamous, I should say, the infamous tochacha, the rebuke, the great rebuke, the tochacha. That language we know actually from Parshat Kedoshim, hocheach tochiach et amitecha. You should rebuke your fellow because that's actually a mitzvah. If someone's doing something wrong, then you have to tell them and help them correct their ways. Now we've had classes before on how delicate that mitzvah is, because you really have to be sure that you're doing it for their benefit and not just to enjoy giving them a rebuke, right? So like there's a cheshbon nefesh, there's sort of an inner questioning that you have to do before you rebuke, and that's for our rebuke to one another. So given that language, it's interesting that we call this list of terrible curses in this week's parsha, we refer to it as the rebuke, the tochacha. This will happen if you don't follow my my what? That's actually part of our question, but the beginning of our parsha starts with that kind of that language. If you don't, im behukotai telechu, and actually it starts with if you do. If you follow my commandments, let's just use the word commandments, then things will go well for you. And if you don't follow my commandments, and it goes badly, and it's worse than just that. It's a short section of if you follow my commandments, and we'll look at that in a second, and then a very long, the rest of the chapter is just I think I wrote in this week's essay that I write for Adar, it's like a cavalcade of miseries. It's just the most horrifying curses, just total destruction, desolation, depravity, just the worst of what could happen. The language of mothers eating their children, which comes up again in Lamentations. We see the first traces of that here. It's just really a terrifying parsha. But it is also a parsha that that begins with a very striking, very notable language. Im behukotai telechu. Okay, so let's take a look at the language. We're going to look just at that opening phrasing and to have to figure out a little bit what these hukotai are. My hukot. If you follow my hukot, things will go well. If you don't, they won't. So what are these hukot? That seems important. And there is, as we'll soon see, there's a lot of debate around how to understand the condition here, the if condition, and that debate will take us into some of the theological debate around the whole question, really the central question that emerges from this week's parsha of reward and punishment, which is a I think difficult question. For modern people, surely the idea that if you do bad things, then bad things will happen to you, and if you do good things will happen to you. I think modern people often feel like, well, that's not borne out in the world, and if those are the faith principles I've inherited from my tradition, I'm not sure I can sign on to that. But it's not just a modern problem. Going back to the Talmud, the rabbis are asking, why is there tzaddik v'ralo? Why is there a righteous person and bad things happen to him? Rasha v'tovlo, a wicked person, and good things happen to him. So this is a big problem, maybe one of the biggest theological problems, that our tradition suggests that, God rewards the good and punishes the wicked, rewards goodness and punishes wickedness, and yet we know from our experience that doesn't always seem to be the case. So in a parsha like this, which so clearly states that this is the way of the world, you will in fact be punished for your misdeeds. How do we understand that? What kind of misdeeds? And we'll see some of our commentators give theories. One in particular that we're going to look at today, I think will be valuable for us to have in our theological toolkit. Okay, so let's take a look now. I'm going to give you here I have. First of all, I'm putting the essay that I wrote this week for Hadar, in case you want to take a look at that. That was a different take on this week's Parsha. But now let's take a look at this week's oh dear. Can you see how discombobulated I am? Yeah. Okay. Here we are. Got it. So here is the opening for this week's Parsha, and here is the source sheet for you. The opening for this week's Parsha, Im Behukotai telechu, and just the language is worthy of a pause, because I've said it a few times. This famous phrasing, Im Behukotai telechu, if you walk in my chukot, okay, which we usually translate as rules, ve'et mitzvotai tishmeru, and you faithfully observe my mitzvot, va'asitem otam, and you do them, v'natati gishmechem beitam, then I will grant your rains in their season, v'natna haaretz yivula, ve'etz hasadeh yiten piryo, so that the earth shall yield its produce and the trees of the field their fruit. So now you can see how this is going. If you do the things I want you to do, follow the commandments, then the rains will come down. I mean, it's really that cause and effect. The actual, not just strange random punishments, but the very sustenance of your existence, the rains from the heaven, they come because you are doing the right thing. You are following God's commandments. And the blessings continue. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage. Your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land. May it be so. And you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts. No sword shall cross your land. Your army shall give chase to your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 of you shall give chase to 10,000, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. All that kind of numbering language gets inverted in the curse section, and if you don't do it, then they'll be following you and they'll be striking you down. And I will look with favor upon you, and I will make you fertile and multiply you. I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat new grains, eat old grain long stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. Abundance. I will establish my abode in your midst. I will not spurn you. I'm just reading this so you get a feel. All of the good things that are coming. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Boom. I am the eternal, your God, who brought you out from the land of the Egyptians to be their slaves no more, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. Okay, great. But that's it. These 10 verses, right? The Parsha begins on verse 3. So these 10 verses or 11 verses are all the good stuff. But im lo tishma'uli, if you don't obey me and don't observe all these commandments, and then the same language here. Ve'im bechukotai timasu, and if you reject my chukot, ve'et mishpatai tigal, and spurn my rules so that you do not observe all my commandments and you break the covenant, I in turn will do this to you. I will wreak misery upon you. consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you. You shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you. You shall flee, though none pursues. That is like, that's a particularly chilling line. Like, you'll just be in terror. Nobody's even coming, and you're just jumpy. And if for all that you do not obey me, I will go on to discipline you sevenfold for your sins, and I will break your proud glory. I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper. Okay, and it goes on and on and on and on. That's just a taste of it. But it gives you a sense of what we're working with here. We're working with a conditional. If you do good, then good will come to you. If you do bad, then terrible, terrible things will come to you. Now, there's the theology, which we will soon grapple with, but there is also the language, as I said, im behukotai. Im behukotai telechu, if you go in the ways of my hukot. Now, what are hukot? What are hukot? Well, we have a classic understanding of what hukot are. We've discussed them many times in this class before. And the Talmud in Masechet Yoma uses the language of chukot and contrasts it with the language of mishpatim, chukim, or mishpatim. It can be a chok and then chukim, or a chukah and then chukot. There's a feminine and masculine version of the word. But presumably they're essentially the same thing. In fact, the feminine chukah is used in the most famous example of a chukah, Zot Chukat Torah. This is the chok, the chukah of the Torah. Marla Brockman, Marla, you keep unmuting, so I'm going to unmute you, but just, yeah, thanks. And that's the red heifer. The red heifer is the most famous example of a chok, or a chukah, and that gives us a sense of how the rabbis understand the chukim, which is these are the commandments that don't have any rational explanation. Okay? The red heifer is the ultimate example of why do you need a perfectly red heifer to burn it and then take its ashes to purify you from contact with the dead? That's what the red heifer commandment is about. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows why. And so it comes to represent, it becomes the paradigm of this idea of a certain kind of mitzvot, a certain kind of commandment that is simply the demand of God. God says so, you do it, and that's all there is. You'll never understand. And that's the ultimate example. But there are some classic mitzvot that fall under this category, like keeping kosher. We don't know why we keep kosher. We keep kosher. God said so. Some people have tried to speculate, oh, it's for health reasons or this or that. But we don't. The Torah doesn't say anything about it. And as far as our rabbis are concerned, it's just a rule, and God said so, and it's a chok. Okay. That is related, by the way, to the language of engraving. Okay. The word chok is related to the root chakak, to engrave. So these are the commands which are simply carved out in stone. They're unchangeable, they're fixed, and just the way it is. And it's not because these are intuitive principles, but just like, this is what God commands. It's been carved in stone. The other category is mishpatim. And mishpatim are the commandments that justice, the Talmud says, if they weren't written, justice would demand that they be written. Dinhu shenikatev. They would have to be that we would have to write them down. Okay, so that's the classic category, and you therefore would be inclined to read our Parsha to be saying, what you need to do is follow my rules, and the ones that don't make sense to you, those are the ones that really matter. You have to follow those commandments, And maybe that's because those commandments are the easiest to reject, to write off, to say these are unreasonable. It's precisely those that are the measure of your willingness to do my will. And that is why you must follow the chukot in order to receive blessing. And if you reject those, I will curse you. Okay. That's one way to, that's one sort of, one theology is that you have to, what is this, Tertullian, right? You have to do it because it is absurd to a certain extent. You just do it because that's the whole point, is that you are willing to follow God's commandment even when you don't understand. Okay, it's sort of like each of these is a little bit of a little akeda, a little binding of Isaac. Like God says something, it seems crazy, but you just do it anyway. It doesn't seem just, but you just do it anyway. It doesn't seem like it has a purpose, but you just do it anyway. Okay, that would be the natural way, given our understanding of these two terms so far, chukim and mishpatim. That would be the natural way to read our parsha, and that would be still devastating to all these curses come, but at least we would have some sense of the particular nature of this threat, which is it's not just do good and I will do good for you, do bad and I will do bad to you. But no, you have to be tuned into these most difficult commandments to observe. However, there's a problem. There's a problem because the language in that opening verse is not just do my chukot. Im behukotai telechu, if you walk in my chukot, my rules, and then it says ve'et mitzvotai tishmeru, and you faithfully observe my mitzvot. Okay. Now, do you see the problem? Mitzvot is the word that we have for all the commandments. You have to do my chukot, or you have to go in the ways of my chukot, and you also have to observe my commandments. Now, wait a minute. If you said I have to observe your commandments, that covers everything. Okay, we are in this tradition. We are careful to take every word that the Torah offers us as meaningful, and so the Torah wouldn't just repeat the idea again just for a flourish. If it says chukot and mitzvot, well, then there's mitzvot, and that covers all of the commandments, the mishpatim, the reasonable commandments, and the chukim, the mysterious commandments. So why say chukot? What are these chukot? Okay, all right, you understand the question? What are these chukot if we've already got the full category of all the commandments? And so this is sort of where we begin our investigation. All of the commentators are trying to figure out, well, what do these chukot refer to if we have mitzvot? It must refer to something else, not the category of all unreasonable or all mysterious commandments, but some other way of understanding this language of chukot. Okay, so I'm just going to, there are many attempts to provide answers, but I want to give you Rashi's, because Rashi is the classic, and then we're going to take a look at a much more modern commentary, and that's where we'll begin to get into our theological conversation. So first, let's take a look at Rashi, and what does Rashi say about this? This is exactly the kind of question that Rashi loves, that Rashi asks. If there's like a repetition of or a superfluous language, there's repetition or superfluous language, Rashi always jumps in and says, wait a minute, what is this phrase for if we already have a phrase that accounts for that? So Rashi here says, if you walk in my chukot, yachol kiyum mitzvot, you might think that this denotes the fulfillment of the commandments. But wait a minute, when it says, and you shall keep my commandments and do them, it's clear that that is the fulfillment of the commandments, okay? Exactly what I just said, that's Rashi Rashi's quick way of speaking it out. Mani mekayem im bechukotai. So what is it? How do I explain and how do I fulfill if you walk in my chukot? Shetiyu amelim batorah. This means that you should amelim, you should labor in the Torah. You should study Torah. You should study, but not just study, but labor in the Torah. I was up in Seattle, and I was davening at the Chabad there, and the Chabad shaliach there, it has been there for 40 years. He's one of the original like shlichim emissaries of the Rebbe, and he's a real classic. You know, I met him, and he was like, "Oh, no, you have a word, you have like a word of Torah for me," and I gave a little word of Torah, and then he had a word of Torah for me. And this is like a classic kind of like exchange in the Beit Midrash. Like the older rabbi says, "No, you have a word for me." So I said something, and he said he was thinking about this Rashi, and he said, "Amelim baTorah." What does it mean to be amelim? To be really deeply laboring in the Torah. And his explanation was that it's like your whole being has to be. It's not just that you study Torah, but everything that you are is consumed with Torah. You're deeply. It's your every thought. Anyway, yeah, worth a visit if you head up to Seattle. But that's what Rashi seems to be telling us. In other words, you should follow my commandments. That's part of it. And this is, in some ways, a classic rabbinic answer. In fact, Rashi gets it from the classic rabbinic midrash on Leviticus, the Sifra, and he says, they say, you keep the commandments, but you also have to study Torah, and that's also what God is asking. And if you study Torah and keep commandments, then it will go well. If you don't study the Torah and you don't keep the commandments, and these are two different things, that's when the tochacha, the curses of the tochacha are coming for you. Okay, so there's a start, and I see already a hand in the air, so maybe we can begin to open it up a little bit. But you've got kind of like the basic pieces of what the commentators are grappling with, and soon we'll take it a step further. But what does Kathy Kobayashi have to say?
Okay. So just kind of going on with this idea that, okay, there are these distinctions of hukot and mishpatim and, mitzvot and everything, but there's also the contrast in the words, at least in the English, is if you walk, and right. It's the first, and the second is observe. And although, they seem very related, they are, in fact, really different physical actions. And I know walking is a big deal, in just in terms of following and laws or commandments and everything. But it's also walking beside God. And, there's a lot of walking as this metaphor, but I also think there must be something about actually walking, and observing is obviously it's more than just seeing, observing, but I find it interesting that they're these two different, the actions are actually different, but that they're also very kind of concrete and physical.
Good. That's great. And that what Kathy is noticing there, I'm focusing more on the unusual word Behukotai, or the distinct word Behukotai. But there is another very prominent word here, im Behukotai telechu. If you go, if you walk, this language of, it can literally mean walking, or just sort of to go in the way. In fact, this is the language that we use for, the rabbis use for the whole legal system, halacha, the walking, the going. So Kathy wonders if that's what we should be emphasizing here. There is an observance of the commandments, but then there's another thing, which is like actually carrying them out, walking through, living. What do we make of that verb? And what does that tell us about what God wants from us? That kind of that kind of reading that Kathy is giving us, that is certainly a part of the kind of field day that the rabbis have with this verse. A lot of parsing what's the if mean, what's the Behukotai mean, and what does it mean to go or walk in God's ways? That language seems important here, and it isn't common. Usually we say observe. We don't usually say to go along with the commandments. Just to give you, I'll just mention to give you a sense of how I say a field day, how sort of much ink has been spilled on these words. I thought of doing this today, but it's just too complicated. One of the great commentators, the Orach Chaim, who was, I'm trying to remember, I think a great rabbi in Morocco, I believe. That's right. The Orach Chaim, and he wrote in the, it was like late 1600s, early 1700s. And the Orach Chaim gives 42 explanations, possible explanations of this phrase. So just like, just various nuances of what could it mean to go? What could it mean, chuko? What could it, like, exactly what we're starting to do here. He does it 42 times as if to say, there are a lot of ways to think about this formula. Okay, let's hear from a couple more, and then we'll dive into our second commentator, Noah.
Yeah, on this one, I was just looking at the Hebrew between the do's and don'ts. In Behukotai telechu, in mitzvotai tishmeru, as opposed to im lo tishmeru li, velo tasu et kol mitzvot. That we're getting the Behukotai if you do all these X's, walk in and follow my mitzvot, I'll do these good things. Whereas if you don't listen to me, imlo tishme'uli, and you then don't do what you heard, then all this bad stuff will happen to you. So it's saying you have to do and listen. You can't just say you'll do, you have to actually do these things.
Right. Okay, good. So this is great. This is like more, I'm focusing on the nouns. This is like a great illustration of how we might think about interpreting the nuances of these verses. I'm focusing on the nouns. What is the difference between chukim and mitzvot? Kathy and Noah are focusing on the verbs. There's lots of verbs here. There's the observe, there's the going, there's the listening, there's the rejecting. So all of the actions here, what kinds of attendance to the mitzvot is God looking for here? And one of them, says Noah, is the listening, the heeding, the kind of the Shema Yisrael, the really taking in and understanding the commandments, which actually I think might lend some support to Rashi's explanation. It's about doing, but it's also about studying, understanding, knowing, laboring in, right? So that's a support, I think, for Rashi's reading. Alan Friedman.
Yeah, this is a phenomenal parsha for the wordplay. That is there not just because they're bored, but to convey meanings. So with respect to and you know, Betzalel Porton was in my chavurah in Philadelphia for a number of years when he was getting his PhD, and he tuned me into all of the word plays here. But the first one that Kathy noticed, the roots lalechet. There's and she asked a question about that, but there's a mutuality in that verb, because in verse 11 we have the use of hitalachti, describing what God will be walking or cause himself to walk with us. Sort of that verb was used in Gan Eden and a few other places. So hitalachti b'tochachem. So if we walk on the halacha, then God walks with us.
Great. So take a look at
And
here.
while we're there,
this is what Alan is saying here. So just so everybody follows, up here, if you, in my laws, you walk or go, if you walk in my chukot. So down here, I think the translation obscures it. I will be ever present in your midst. But that's not what it says. It says, I will go, I will sort of move myself amongst you. And that's almost like I mean, it's the same root there. So it's the like, I too will go. If you go with me, I will go with you. So that's very nice parallelism. And Alan, you want to continue?
Yeah, just one more because it's right next door. If you go to, you're right there. If you what God will the strange the verb to spurn tigal below tigal, and if you look at the tigal,
This
it
is
sounds
the verb he's talking about, velo tigal. I will not spurn you, right?
we don't want that. But the other word that sounds just like it, if I said tigal and you weren't looking at it, you put an aleph there to redeem.
Oh,
So
very nice.
spurn and redeem.
Very nice. But
Opposites.
that's very nice. And I mean, without that wordplay, I would just say you know, just straight parallelism. You know, you are, you know, you're right that the tigal is here. It's also down here. V'im et mishpatai tigal nafshechem. So there's again a kind of a like, if I get this kind of action from you, so I will respond in kind. And I guess, you know, so that's very nice reading. Who did it you say that tuned you into all this parallelism?
But Salel Porton.
Oh, very, very cool.
He's a bit older than you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, some are. Some are. Okay. So that's like good reading, good like linguistic work there. But it brings us back to the kind of the central claim here, or the basic claim, or the way the claim is usually understood, which is that midah k'neged midah, measure for measure. If you do, so I will do. What you put out, you will get in return. I will act with attentiveness to you. I will go with you if you go with me. I will spurn you if you spurn me. Okay? And that's certainly a theology. This is all a relationship, and I'm going to give you back exactly what you give me. You treat me well, I will treat you well. And it's not just about then the observance of the commandments. It's about the honoring of the relationship. It's about, you know, God's desire that you show God love, respect, attentiveness, and then God will respond in kind. Will show, yes, provide the reins, but more broadly, God will be with you and God will not reject you. Okay. So having said all that, now I want to take us to this last piece of commentary from the Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, whose commentary is called Ha'emek Davar, the depth of the matter. And the Netziv was the last Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, which was like the kind of the greatest, the most legendary of the European yeshivot, and where the Vilna Gaon was. So this is the last great. Was the Vilna Gaon there, or just his student was there? His student was Chaim, was the Rosh Yeshiva, and then later the Netziv was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, and was really, like, in some ways the last of the great Roshei Yeshiva, the great sort of legendary scholars who headed academies in Europe. That yeshiva closed down because the times were changing, and they were requiring, the state was beginning to get involved in requiring that the yeshiva spend part of the time fulfilling, you know, state requirements and secular studies. And the Netziv closed down the yeshiva instead. He was like, that's not a yeshiva, and we're not going to do that here. This is in the university. So that was the end of Volozhin and the end of an era. But as I say that, I also mean to say that that the Netziv, who lived in the 1800s, it was the end of an era, but also in some ways the beginning of a new voice and a new spirit in Jewish thought and in Torah commentary. His commentary, the Hamek Davar, which is right here, it's a worth looking at if you're a Hebrew reader. I don't think there's a translation. It's in many ways it's the first really modern commentary, because there's something about the way that he analyzes characters and the character of God that seems very aware of some of the modern difficulties. As Judaism headed into modernity, the difficulties with maintaining that old school theology and some of the questions that people were asking of traditional religion. So we have been all along aware of one of these great theological challenge, which is the challenge of reward and punishment. If you do this, I will reward you. If you do bad, I will punish you. So the Netziv has a different reading of this Parsha, which again hinges on an interpretation of the word Hukot. So let's take a look here. Okay, the Netziv. Here we go. Okay, if you walk in my Hukot, in Behukotai, this can't be explained as the commandments that have no reason given. We've been saying this all along because those are part of my commandments. Because of this, Rashi explains in the name of the Sifra that you should labor in Torah. And that's possible, he says. According to this understanding, the meaning of my Chukot is like he gives some support to Rashi's opinion. It's like the phrasing we see in several places that these are the 13 principles or the rules through which the Torah is interpreted. Sometimes it says Yud Gimel Midot Shehatorah Nichkeket Behem. The Torah is carved out through these rules, is understood through these rules. Okay, so that would give support to Rashi's understanding that it can't be mitzvot, so it must be studying Torah instead. But the Netziv has another source, and it changes the understanding of these chukot entirely. However, Barabba in Midrash Rabbah it says the chukot, through which I carved out the heavens and the earth. Chukot shechikakti behem, chakakti behem, shamayim ba'aretz, and all of the foundations of the world. And there is a hint in this verse that this explanation is correct, and that this is a condition that the blessed God requests we follow in order to maintain the stability of the world. Okay? So the chukot here are not, it's not studying Torah, and they're not mitzvot at all. It's if you follow the ways of the world, the ways in which the world, the principles and the rules by which the world was created, in order to maintain the stability of the world. Okay, let me read this a little further through, and then we'll get a sense of what he means. But I hope we understand so far that what he's saying is that first phrasing, mitzvot is one thing, but there's some other thing that you have to follow that is the ways of creation, the ways of the universe, almost like almost like the physical laws of the universe, but now a spiritual version of that. Okay, what does he mean by this? The intention here is that we should know that the rewards and punishment are not like a king's decrees, which simply depend on his will and which at any time can change according to his heart's desire. God's not just saying, this is what I want. God is saying, this is the way of the world. And rather, it is like a doctor who warns a person not to eat certain foods, for they will do damage. This is not an expression of his will. He's just informing him what happens in the natural order. The chukot are the foundations of the universe. So it is with the commandments and the transgressions, for the blessed Creator has founded them in such a way that reward and punishment will result from their performance or neglect. Okay, let's just stop here and make sure that we understand, because he said a very major thing here. And I wonder how it resonates with you. Reward and punishment is not God saying, oh, I don't like that, I'm going to punish you for it. Or thank you for doing my commandments, that's wonderful, I'll give you a reward, in that sort of, relational exchange, maybe a bad relationship exchange. No, the blessings and the curses articulated in Parshat Behukotai, says the Netziv, relying on this earlier midrash. There's the mitzvot, but this parsha is telling you the mitzvot are sort of embedded in the foundation of creation. What God is informing you is just the consequences. There are consequences to good behavior and consequences to bad behavior, and God's just warning us. Just warning us, this is the way of the world. If you and the hint, he said there's a hint in the verse. The hint is the word if. If you do these things, this is what happens. If you don't do these things, this is what happens. Not because I will come and throw fire down at you from the heavens, but because this is the order of things. There are certain things that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and this is the way of the world. Okay? This is the beginning of a different kind of theology, which says that the whole system of reward and punishment should be understood as God's explanation of the consequences of good and bad action. Okay? Now, I want to just now turn and ask whether that is a more palatable version of reward and punishment. Does that help us at all? Is that easier to have faith in than the system of God just doing whatever God wants and rewarding and punishment out of God's own sense of pleasure or anger? All right, so let's hear from a few folks. Matt Silberstein.
Funny, I was going to say this before that, thinking it was not relevant, and now actually my points are relevant. So one is, I think he's wrong about Behukotai is what creates the world, because if you're telling me it comes from etching, the world is created with words, with speaking, with breath, and that's really important in Torah. So the fact that we're now talking about the written down stuff is a new thing, is a change. That said, the second part is a point I think I've hammered a couple of times, that they think this stuff is direct. You touch, you do the bad thing, you get the skin disease. That's not God punishing. That's not even you do something bad so bad things happen, but simply this is the way things work. So I really do think that is a core, profound metaphysical view that is inside Torah.
I see. So that's interesting. So Matt, you're saying this isn't the modern spin on it. You think that this is, the Netziv is really accessing that's how you understand the Torah to be speaking. That God is just saying, these are the consequences. It's not a kind of an expression of, we usually understand the Torah to be a kind of expression of God's dissatisfaction and rage and sort of looking down and saying, I'm going to get you. But Matt is saying, no, this is an accurate understanding of the Torah's own theology, which is the Torah is describing a world in which there's a kind of mechanized system of consequences, and the Torah's rules are meant to be presented as part of the fabric of the universe. Great.
It may also be punishment. I'm not saying that doesn't exist.
Right. No, I mean, certainly it is punishment, but it is punishment that is, I guess part of what we're wondering is whether it makes a difference or makes it easier to understand or more palatable to see God as the designer of the universe, who then informs his creatures how it all works, or God is the monitor of the universe that is doling out punishment when God is dissatisfied with our behavior. Are those different paradigms, and is one more not just feel better, but does one make more sense? Okay, let's hear from Stan.
Okay, Rabbi, my daughter's bat mitzvah is this weekend, and she said to me, this Torah portion doesn't make any sense. And she said, I don't understand reward and punishment that way. How do I explain that to her? Maybe perhaps we've been talking around this issue from the beginning of this class. How do we explain that to a young person? Maybe an old person too. Thank you.
Okay, great. So how do we explain this? How do we explain this idea that, there are consequences to our actions? And by the way, we haven't addressed the problem we started with, which was that we don't always see bad things happening to bad people and good things happening to good people. So this reading from the Netziv takes God's vindictiveness out of the picture, but it makes it even more mechanized and direct consequence. So how do we understand that? And how do we understand our relationship with God if this has become so kind of mechanized? All right, so let's see what the Netziv says about that. Let's take a look, because this, after all, does make God almost like a kind of outside observer, just telling you the way things work. But the Netziv says, now it is worth asking if the Blessed One actually desires that the mitzvot be fulfilled, or is just warning and informing us like a doctor. For the doctor has no investment in whether or not a person is careful with her advice. Okay? So that's part of the dilemma here. The way that the Netziv has reframed it, it's kind of like you're just being given a prescription. The situation has been diagnosed, and the doctor's just telling you, but the doctor's going to go to another patient. The doctor's not deeply invested in your outcome. Okay, maybe a nice doctor would like things to turn out well, but that's not the relationship you have with a doctor. But he says, and you notice I don't get to use the female pronoun all the time when I'm doing translation, but I feel like I wanted to use it for the doctor because doctors can be women, and so I flipped over to the feminine pronoun. This is more like a doctor, he says, who warns her own child, for she greatly desires that the child be careful so that he will live. So there's a difference in the way a doctor warns her child or warns someone else, even though in the content of the warning there isn't. For the Holy Blessed One desires that Israel receive reward, and all of this is hinted at in the fact that the verse begins with, if you follow my rules. This is the language of requesting, for it is as if the Holy Blessed One is imploring us to keep the commandments. Okay, so the Netziv wants to have it both ways, wants to have the world just works this way, these are the consequences, and God is the one telling you the way the world works, but also God is your doctor, but God is also your parent. And God wants the world to work for you in the best possible way. So it's like your parent, the doctor, who comes in and says, your mother, the doctor, who comes in and says, I'm a doctor, please listen to me because I want you to be healthy. Okay? And that ultimately is the Netziv's approach to the Tochacha, which is that it is not God's desire that we experience these things. It is not even a threat that God is giving, that we endure these things. It is an explanation of the way the world works, per Matt Silberstein. But it is also, he retains the personality of God, the love of God, the intimacy of God, that God is both the abstract design, principle of creation, the design, the architect of the universe, but also God is the loving relational parent who wants to guide us through. And maybe that explains the language of telechu. follow my ways, follow my way. I will guide you through the world. And if you follow my ways, I will help you get through this world with blessing and with safety. And if you don't, God forbid, me forbid, things are going to go very badly. Okay, we are out of time, and so I just want to say that I want to close as we close this class by saying that the theology here is not easy to solve. I don't presume that I have given you by presenting this piece from the Netziv. I don't presume that I've given you a comfort and resolved the dilemma, the sort of theological, all of the theological dilemmas implicit in the Tochacha. But what this explanation does provide for us is some sense that there are that the Torah, as Matt was saying, that the Torah suggests that there are maybe the way to look at it is not reward and punishment, but consequences, cause and effect. And it's not a question of people getting what they deserve or not, but a question of being mindful of how we walk through the world, because there are consequences to our actions. There are sometimes devastating consequences to our actions. And so this Torah portion of the book of Leviticus ends by warning us that our actions matter, that what we do matters, and that we build the world around us through our actions, not just our attendance to God's will, not just our obedient following of the commandments, but through a deep understanding of the way the world works. And so when Rashi tells us that part of our job is to study Torah, the Netziv tweaks that slightly, but I think we can retain that idea that part of what we're being asked here is to study Torah, but also to study the world around us, and to try to learn principles, laws in the world around us. What happens when we don't treat each other well? What happens when we ignore the consequences of our action? The world is destroyed. The world is destroyed if we are not attentive to the implications and the consequences of our actions. And that is a message that I think, without solving the theological problems, that's a message that I think we would all do well to contemplate as we leave this book of Exodus and go out into the desert of the world. That is the next book, the book of Bamidbar, the book of wandering through the wilderness. And the children of Israel are going to face all kinds of terrible consequences to their actions. And we continue to. All the people of the world, we continue to suffer from the consequences of our actions. And so the Tochacha is a good reminder, maybe not of God's rage, maybe of God's care and concern and love for us, and desire that we figure out how to walk through the world in a way that creates peace and harmony, and not the destruction that we see all around us. So may it be so. May our Torah study be a way of coming to understand the ways of the world, not just the Torah, but of the world. And may we walk towards a world full of, as Behukotai suggests is possible, full of peace. Okay, I am once again grateful to have learned with you all this year. I will see you again in the fall. I love you all. I love this community. I love having a group of people that wants to do this work of studying the Torah and studying the world with me. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you after the summer. See you next year, so to speak. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.